Welcome. You know how sometimes you want to really get a good handle on something? Go deep, but without feeling like you're wading through a textbook.
Right. You want the insights without the overwhelm.
Exactly. And that's what we're aiming for today. We're doing a focused deep dive into a specific moment, the year 1974, in the life of the artist Bob Camblin.
And we've got some really interesting material to work with for this. There are exhibition records which show where he was active,
Okay.
some of his own personal quotes and reflections from that year, and even a look at the philosophical ideas he was engaging with. Gives a pretty rounded view.
Okay, so the mission here is basically to sift through all this and pull out the really key stuff, the interesting bits that give us a richer picture of Camblin's art and his thinking back in '74.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
And well, the first thing that really jumps out about 1974, looking at those records, is just how much he was exhibiting.
Yeah, I saw that. 11 exhibitions in 1 year. That's a lot.
It really is. And they weren't just local shows either.
No, the locations are pretty spread out. Amarillo, Longview, Houston, Dallas, Abilene, Midland, Wichita Falls, and New York, too. Quite the circuit.
He was covering a lot of ground in Texas, definitely, but also making sure he had that wider national exposure.
You have to think that kind of schedule, it's not just about showing the work, is it? It's networking, building connections.
Oh, absolutely. Galleries, collectors,
Yeah.
other artists, it builds momentum,
Yeah.
and it suggests a real push for visibility at that point.
And it wasn't just quantity, right? There were some significant milestones in there.
For sure. Like the Longview Museum buying his piece, Galveston Deadfall.
That's a big step, getting into a permanent museum collection.
Exactly. It's a different level of recognition. It means curators and institutions are seeing lasting value in the work.
Yeah, real validation. And then there was that traveling print show.
Right, the hand-colored prints exhibition. That one was organized by Comprehensive Exhibition Services.
And it traveled pretty widely.
It did 12 museums across the U.S. and Canada. So his prints were getting seen far and wide.
And we even have a critic's take on those prints from the time.
Yeah, Diane Kelder, writing in Art in America, she made this interesting comment about the etchings in that show, not just his, but others too, saying the color was surprisingly contained by even subservient to line.
Huh. So the drawing, the line work, was still dominant, even with the hand coloring.
That's what she saw. It suggests a real kind of deliberate control in how he was using color in those prints. It wasn't just splashed on, it worked with the underlying structure.
Okay. And then New York, he was in a show at the Nancy Hoffman Gallery.
Yes, a drawings exhibition. And what's interesting there is the catalog introduction by Nancy Hoffman herself.
What did she say?
She talked about how drawing around that time was really being seen more as a, quote, prime form of expression, not just preparatory sketches anymore.
Ah, right. So drawing was having a moment, gaining status?
Exactly. It was a significant trend in the early 70s, this elevation of drawing. And Camblin being in that show at a key gallery like Hoffman's put him right in the middle of that conversation.
And do we know what piece he showed there?
We do. It was called As Far as I Can See Venice, watercolor and pencil on paper, specific size noted, dated 1974. So a finished, substantial drawing.
Okay, good detail. And New York wasn't just the Hoffman Gallery, was it?
No, he was also included in the 19th National Print Exhibition over at the Brooklyn Museum.
Which is another major venue, national level.
Definitely. Shows he was operating in significant circles, especially within printmaking.
And there was something at the Fort Worth Art Museum, too.
Yeah, the drawings from the Permanent Collection show. The brochure is actually dated 73, but his inclusion indicates that his drawings were recognized and held by regional museums too, suggesting sort of an ongoing presence.
So painting this picture, it's an artist who's really active, visible, getting institutional recognition.
Very much so. But it wasn't all just about the external stuff, the exhibitions. The sources show he was deeply engaged with certain philosophical ideas during 74 as well.
Like who? What was catching his attention?
Well, quite significantly, Michel de Montaigne. Camblin actually adopted Montaigne's famous question, Qu'est-ce que je? What do I know? As a personal motto.
What do I know? That's
Go ahead.
quite a motto for an artist. Suggests a certain humility or constant questioning.
I think so. A kind of openness, maybe a rejection of absolute certainty. And he apparently even connected it, playfully, to his alter ego, Kay Sage, because of the sound similarity.
Ah, that's interesting. Shows a bit of intellectual playfulness there.
Definitely. And taking on that motto, what do I know? It might well have fed into his art, you know? Maybe encouraging experimentation or looking at things without preconceptions.
Makes sense. Who else was he reading or thinking about?
Well, the sources mention him rereading Sartre and Camus, so that existentialist thread was still very much present for him.
Okay, the big French thinkers. But wasn't there an American influence too?
Yes, very much so. Ralph Waldo Emerson. Camblin apparently saw Emerson as sort of the American equivalent to Montaigne.
Interesting comparison. And he didn't just read Emerson, did he?
No, he went much further. He actually hand-scripted Emerson's essay Self-Reliance,
Wow, wrote it out by hand.
the whole thing, and then created hand-colored lithographs of it. That's a serious level of engagement with a text.
That really is. What do you think drew him so strongly to self-reliance?
Well, you think about Emerson's message, trust yourself, rely on your own intuition, don't just conform. Maybe that resonated particularly strongly as he was making big life changes.
Like leaving teaching.
Exactly. That essay could have been almost a philosophical anchor, giving him the confidence to strike out purely as an artist, maybe even change his style, trusting his own path. Themes of individualism, self-trust, they seem very relevant.
It's fascinating how these different philosophical strands, Montaigne's questioning, existentialism, Emerson's self-reliance, seem to be weaving together for him then.
Yeah, it paints a picture of a really active intellectual life running alongside the art making.
And speaking of big life changes, that teaching job ending was a major one, right?
Huge. The academic year 73-74 was his last at Rice University. He made the call to go full-time as an artist, living off his art.
That takes guts. A leap into the unknown, financially and otherwise.
Absolutely, a real commitment. And it seems like that decision coincided with a noticeable shift in the art itself.
How so?
The sources suggest he moved away from the more fantastical imagery he'd done earlier
Right.
and started painting landscapes almost exclusively around this time.
That is a significant change. From fantasy to landscape, any idea why? Was it connected to leaving Rice, having more freedom?
That's a good question. It could be. Maybe more time to focus on subjects that resonated personally. Or perhaps something about that intense exhibition schedule made him want to connect with something more grounded.
Mhm.
Or maybe it ties back to that Emersonian idea of finding truth in nature.
Could be any or all of those.
Yeah.
Interesting. But even as he moved towards maybe a more solitary landscape focus, collaboration wasn't totally gone.
No, not entirely. The holding firm, that collaborative group he was part of, even though its structure was changing, they apparently completed a portrait together of Fanny Goldfine Benton after she passed away.
So still some joint projects happening. And there was that other big project, the tower.
Ah, yes. He moved his studio to 519 Sol Ross. And then in the backyard, he started building this 3-story tower
With who?
with Earl Staley, Jim Tate, Alan Octo Smith, Mark Batista, a whole group of them, friends and fellow artists.
Sounds like quite the undertaking.
Apparently, Staley even made a Super 8 movie of the construction. So it was this real hands-on communal effort, almost like building their own little artistic fortress or something.
You can picture it, can't you? That energy.
Yeah, very tangible group project.
Yeah.
And then, following that, the BE&J Holding Firm and Associates, slightly different configuration, maybe put out a news release
What for?
announcing they were opening their private studios for art study. They actually taught local art students for about a year.
Huh. So even after leaving formal teaching, he gets involved in teaching again, but on his own terms. An entrepreneurial streak there, too.
Seems like it. Engaging with the local scene, sharing knowledge. But the sources also mention that Staley eventually left the holding firm around this time, got his own studio.
Ah, okay.
Because that kind of marks the end of that specific collaborative setup. It really feels like 1974 was a year of things ending and new things starting up for him.
Definitely. A real pivot point. And to get inside his head a bit during all this, we have those quotes from him from 74.
Yes, which are fantastic little windows, like this one. I cannot tell a lie to myself for very long. Camblin, 1974. Find something in nature that completes you and then surrender.
Wow. That connects so directly to the landscape shift, doesn't it?
It really does. That idea of self-honesty, finding completion in nature, and then this word surrender. It's quite powerful. Suggests a deep, almost spiritual connection he was seeking or finding outdoors.
And what about this one? I will stick with common sense and try for the perfectly average view of the universe. That sounds almost counterintuitive for an artist.
Keep reading, though. He says, I think that will let me enjoy miracles on both sides of science and magic and the nuances of the smear between the whiteness and the blackness.
Ah.
And hope that I can be around when the two meet in the near future and we have an intensely bright gray.
Okay, that's much richer. So perfectly average isn't about being boring. It's about finding a balanced viewpoint, one that allows you to appreciate everything, the rational and the magical.
That's how I read it. It's this desire for A middle ground, a perspective that embraces paradox,
Mhm.
that sees the wonder in the everyday and anticipates some kind of synthesis that intensely bright gray.
Yeah, that's a really thought-provoking way to put it, not settling for extremes.
Exactly. And then there's his thought on art's purpose.
Which was?
Art is not just images. Art for art's sake has become art for life's sake, or art for my sake, or art for survival's sake.
That feels significant too. Moving beyond art just being about aesthetics.
Yeah, it suggests art becoming more personal, more essential for him. Tied to living, to his own needs, maybe even to coping or making sense of things. Survival's sake is a strong phrase.
It implies a real urgency, doesn't it? And then there are those really short, punchy ones.
Like step off the train of thought.
Yeah, and when you think, don't act. When you act, don't think. They feel almost like instructions to himself. Or maybe koans.
Yeah, like little mental exercises.
Yeah.
Disrupt your usual patterns. Recognize the difference between reflection and action. They offer these quick, sharp insights into how he might have been trying to navigate his own consciousness, his creative process.
So, wrapping this all together for 1974, it's quite a year.
It really is. You've got this intense burst of exhibition activity showing growing recognition, a major shift in his subject matter towards landscapes.
Right, the move away from fantasy.
Deep engagement with philosophy, Montaigne, Emerson, existentialism.
The end of the Rice job. The end of the holding firm as it was.
But then new beginnings too, like the Studio Tower project of the teaching venture.
It really underscores how looking at these different kinds of sources, exhibition lists, quotes, project details, gives you such a richer, more layered understanding than any single one could.
Absolutely. Even the dry facts, like where he showed work, tell a story about his choices, his ambition, the context he was in. It all weaves together.
It definitely gives you a much fuller sense of the artist at that moment. Thinking about that motto he adopted, "What do I know?" alongside just how much he was producing and exhibiting in 74. It makes you wonder, doesn't it?
What's that?
Well, what is that relationship between constantly questioning everything, that "what do I know" spirit, and the drive to actually create so much? How do deep questioning and prolific making coexist or feed each other?
That's a really interesting question to leave things on. Does the questioning fuel the creation, or does the creation provide temporary answers, or maybe something else entirely?
Something to ponder, maybe. Anyway, this has been fascinating, really digging into that specific year. Thanks for exploring it with me.
My pleasure. It was a rich year to unpack.
Until our next deep dive.